Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the second shelf. And yes, you saw this intro wording right. I'm going to give you a TBR. And for once, it actually means to be read, even though it's more like, a list of possibles, an LOP, something like that. But anyway, in a couple of days, a week from now, it's November. And one of the things that always happens in November is, of course, Nonfiction November. That's a month-long event. Years ago, I think 5 or 6 years ago, started by Olive from a book Olive, in which it's a readathon or read along or however you want to call it, encouraging all of us to read more nonfiction. If you don't read any, just read one book. If you read nonfiction regularly, just try to read more nonfiction that you normally would do. And Olive this year has a couple of co-organizers. I have to look at my list. It's Sabrina from Stay Cucino, Natalie from A Curious Reader, Jill from The Book Bully, and Andrea from Infinite Text. I will leave links to their channels or Twitter accounts or whatever they have in the description box. And the first link to Olive's channel is also her announcement video where she explains everything. But I'm sure you are familiar with Nonfiction November. And every year, Olive and her co-organizers of that year come up with a couple of very broad one-word prompts. And this year, and again, I have to look at my little notebook here. This year, the prompts are time, movement, buzz, and discovery. And you don't have to use these prompts if you don't want to. And what I like about the prompts is not so much, looking at the prompt and then thinking, what do I want to read for this prompt, but more taking a stack of books, nonfiction books that I would really like to read and then make them fit into the prompts. That's just me. I think that's funny. But anyway, so I have 2 books, possibles for each of the prompts. So 8 books to show you. And the first one is the only book that I don't have a physical copy of because I decided to read that as an ebook. And that's Roxane Gay's memoir, Hunger, a memoir of my body. It was published 3 years ago and it fits time, the first prompt, because it has been on my to-read list for a very, very long time. 3 years since it came out. Roxane Gay, of course, doesn't need an introduction. She is an American writer. Her parents were from Haiti, so she is a person of color, and she is a writer, a scholar, an activist or political commentator or however you want to call it. And this memoir is just what it says it is. It recounts Roxane Gay's experience with sexual violence and the consequences that it had on her life, but also on her body because she started eating. And like I said, this has been on my TBR for a really, really long time. And I want to read it, and I will read it together with Lukáš, formerly from, and now I have an itch on my nose, sorry about that, formerly from Totally Pretentious, and his new channel is called A Curious Reader's Thesis. Let me look this up if I got that right. Not a curious, but of course, stupid me, A Cruel Reader's Thesis. So I will leave a link to his channel down below. So we will be reading Roxane Gay's Hunger. And for me, it's one of the 2 books that fit the prompt time. My second pick for the prompt time is a book that I think it's timely, but it also goes back in time. And that's another memoir, Margot Jefferson, Negroland, first published in 2015. And I am reading this book, or want to read this book, also for another project that is ongoing in 2020. If you're following me, you're probably familiar with that project, and that is, I call it Reading the Decade, in which I read 2 books from each year between 2010 and 2019, a fiction and a nonfiction nonfiction book. And this was my nonfiction pick for the year 2015, and I haven't gotten to it yet. And it's only 2 more months to finish this project. So I better hope that I will get to this book as well. Margot Jefferson wrote this memoir about growing up in a wealthy Chicago Black community in the 1950s and 60s. I have to say, I know I talked about this book previously in my Reading the Decade video when I used to make videos about this project, which I don't do anymore because I'm sort of reading 2018 and then 2014, so anyway. And I know that this has kind of mixed reviews. I remember I think Dee Dee told me she thought it was quite boring, but it is a slim little book, and I'm interested in, you know, a perspective, a Black author's perspective from an affluent Chicago neighborhood. I think that's something I haven't read a lot about. I don't think I have read anything about that, so it's still my 2015 pick, even though I'm a bit hesitant and don't have maybe too high. My expectations are not too high, but still. So this is my second pick for the prompt time, and also my decade reading pick for nonfiction 2015. The second prompt is movement, and my first choice possibles as a possible for this is actually a book that Olive from a book Olive featured on her channel as a recommendation, and it immediately grabbed my attention, and I thought, that's something I want to read. And that's another memoir, Melody Warnick. Here we go. This is Where You Belong, first published in 2016. Melody Warnick is a freelance journalist, and she moved to Blacksburg, Virginia from Austin, Texas. And this is her memoir, but also sort of tips how to, you know, feel at home in a new place. And it grabbed my attention, first of all, because Olive recommended it, but also if you following my channel, you probably know that I've lived in Amsterdam for a very, very long time, even though I'm born in Germany. So I lived there for more than 20 years. And a couple of years ago, I still work in the Netherlands, but I moved back to Germany, to Cologne, for various reasons. And even though I knew the city before I moved there, because one of my best friends has lived in Cologne for more than 20 years, and I moved to her neighborhood, so we are really close. It's just like across the street. But still, I feel, even after all these years, that I hadn't made Cologne my home. It's just a city I live in. And I thought, well, it might be a good idea for 2021, as a project to try and really ground myself in this city. So this memoir seemed something that might help and fun to read. And my second possibility for the prompt movement is a book by a person or about a person, I should rather say, that moves me, that I'm really interested in. And it's a biography of Maeve Brennan in German, so don't get scared about the German title. Michaela Karl, Ich würde so etwas nie ohne Lippenstift lesen, which means I wouldn't read something like that without lipstick, which is a sort of a little bit adjusted quote from Maeve Brennan. And Maeve Brennan is one of my, what I call leading ladies, authors that I'm really interested in, not only in their work, but also in their life. Another one is Susan Sontag. You probably know that if you're watching my channel. Maeve Brennan was born in Ireland, but moved to the US with her family when she was about 17, to Washington, and then to New York. And she stayed in New York even after her parents moved back. Maeve Brennan was born in 1917, and she is all but forgotten. She wrote for The New Yorker, she wrote short stories, novellas, and I love her writing, but I also really like her style. And Michaela Karl is a German historian who writes biographies. So this also fits another project for this year, the Reading German 2020 project that was started by Mel. And she asked me to join her, and we have a Goodreads group. You all know that. I'm talking about the Read German project, have been talking about it a lot. So again, this fits two sort of prompts or projects. And I'm really looking forward to reading more about Maeve Brennan. I hope this book will get translated at some point into English, but for now it's only available in German. The third prompt that Olive and her co-organizers came up with is buzz. And for me, this was the easiest because I immediately thought of buzzword, the words, that grab you when you look at books. And one of my buzzwords, obviously, that's not a surprise, looking at the list, even for this TBR, is feminism. I'm read a lot of feminist literature in 2020. I wanted to educate myself more about the history of feminism and various aspects. And so both books that I have on the list for this prompt are for the buzzword feminism. And the first one is Ariel Levy, Female Chauvinist Pig, Women and the Rise of Ranch Culture. Ranch? Anyway, published also in 2016. Also, why do I say also? Published in 2016. And I will be reading this as a buddy read with Kim, who also changed her channel name, and her channel is now called The Middle of the Book March. I hope I said that right. Ariel Levy is a journalist, and I just read recently in October, I read her memoir. And now I forgot the title of the memoir. Let me have a look. I'm so badly prepared today. It's just amazing how bad prepared I am. The rules do not apply. Of course. Sorry for the bad lighting when I have to look at my computer. The rules do not apply, which I quite liked. I thought the first part was stronger than the second part. But this book is about, the empowerment of women through ranch culture. And I thought this was very interesting, and Kim wanted to read it as well. So we will be reading this as a buddy read. And the other book that fits the buzzword feminism is a recent release that I featured in a TBR video, meaning to be released, a couple of months ago, and that's Maggie Doherty, The Equivalence, and it's quite heavy. Sorry, it's just a weird day today, obviously. The Equivalent is the story of a 1960s program at Radcliffe that you could do the equivalent of a PhD, because women couldn't do really PhDs at that time. And it follows the life during that time of 5 artists, one of which is Anne Sexton. And that's what pulled me into the book, because I was interested of reading more about this poet. So it's just what it says: a story of art and female friendship and liberation in the 1960s. So it's a feminism from a certain point of view, and I'm interested in that, and certainly because of Anne Sexton. I have to admit, the other artists featured in there I'm not that familiar with. It's Maxine Cumin, the painter Barbara Swan, the sculptor Mariana Pineda, and the writer Tilly Olsen. So I can educate myself also about artistic women in the 1960s that I don't know anything about. How about that? And the last prompt is discovery. And that was also an easy one, because I have lots of books on my wish list or to read list, and some even on my physical TBR, that are about things that I like to either discover more, learn more about, but also about discovery in the sense of scientific discovery. And I'm interested in, astronomy, science, physics, that kind of thing. And I picked one, and I'm not going to butcher the name of the author, Priyamvada, I butchered it, Priyamvada Natarajan, Mapping the Heavens, which came out a couple of years ago, 3 or 4 years ago. Natarajan writes about the discoveries in astronomy, mapping the heavens. And that's one of the subjects that I'm really interested in. And I'm not going to talk about this book very long because I can already feel a lot of you just falling asleep thinking about reading something like that. But for me, it's she's an astrophysicist, and talking about how we explored the stars and mapping the heavens. Yeah, that's my thing. Sorry about that. And the second book for the prompt discovery is then, of course, about the brain. And I picked a book that I could also have, put in the category buzzword, because it is also feminism. Yeah, this list is rather feminist heavy. That's just me. And that's Gina Rippon, The Gendered Brain, published, I think, last year or the year before. Gina Rippon is a researcher, a professor of cognitive neuroimaging. So she researches the brain in a certain way, and this book is just what it says on the cover in the subtitle. It's about neuroscience, the new developments in neuroscience, and Gina Rippon's claim, as I understood it, is that this whole myth about the differences between the female and the male brain, they are all BS. I'm all here for that. So it's quite a junkster, and I might read this. It's a sort of a buddy read possibility on the list of possible buddy reads, I should say, with Kathleen, from Kathleen Ann. But we picked another book first that we will start next week, but there are 30 days in November. So I think in the second half, we might pick up this book, huh, Kathleen? I hope. But anyway, so I'm looking forward to learn something about the brain. I'm really interested about that, and more specifically, of course, about this, myth, quote unquote, of the female brain. So these were my 8 possibles for Nonfiction November, 2 for each prompt, and I will, of course, prioritize the buddy reads because I'm very committed to my buddy reads, but I still hope that I might get at least to some of the other books that are on this TBR LOP list of possibles. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments whether you participate in Nonfiction November and whether you are doing something with the prompts or not. I'm looking forward to your comments as always. I hope you are still safe and healthy, of course, and I'll see you all soon in the next one.